Welcome back to Biographics. I'm your host, cosmic horror author Eric Malachite, and today's script was provided by Larry Holsworth. So be sure to show him some love in the comments as you deploy your likes, subscribe to the channel if you're not, and share this video with someone who loves learning about the historical figures and events that have shaped our world. Let's get to it. How will I be remembered? As a technician or artist? As a humorist or a visionary? Norman Rockwell. When it comes to biographies of well-known or famous artists, they tend to open with one of two things being mentioned: that they were either unappreciated in their own time or that much of their work was lost to the ever-vengeful winds of time. Neither of those sentiments apply to Norman Rockwell, who was not only beloved by the public in his lifetime, seeing his art adorn covers of the most popular publications of the day, but nearly every single one of the 4,000 plus pieces of art he created during his lifetime survives to this day. Some pieces are in museums, others in galleries, and a good number are in the hands of private collectors who are fans of his work and now iconic exaggerated realism style. Steven Spielberg, for example, is known to have an original Rockwell hanging in his home office. In fact, he has several of them, as does his friend George Lucas, with the pair being engaged in a 4-decade-long measuring contest to see who can collect the most. Don't believe us? Well, consider that, according to Lucas, literally the first thing he bought when Star Wars became a box office smash was a Rockwell, specifically a piece titled Boy and Father: Baseball Dispute. In response, Spielberg went out and bought a bigger one. In pop culture, Rockwell similarly enjoys great and enduring success, with there being countless references to his work in everything from movies to music. In regards to the former, pretty much every iconic shot from Forrest Gump was designed to be evocative of a Rockwell piece, while in the world of music, and more recently in time, musician and millennial hero Lana Del Rey named an album simply Norman Rockwell as a nod to his undeniable influence on American culture. But just because Rockwell was and remains popular doesn't mean he was all that respected as an artist, with many critics, even to this day, derisively referring to him as an illustrator rather than as a serious painter. One reason for this was that Rockwell primarily worked and supplied art for magazines and book publishers. Yeah, I guess screw him for having a job. Most famously, Rockwell produced covers for the Saturday Evening Post, for much of his lifetime the most popular magazine in America. Less well known are the many illustrations he produced for articles within the magazine. However, the Post illustrations were far from the only place where Rockwell's work could be seen by the public. He maintained a working relationship with the Boy Scouts of America for over 50 years, producing annual calendars as well as illustrations and cover art for what was then known as Boy's Life, the official publication of the BSA. Today, Boy's Life lives on as Scout Life and is aimed at children of all ages rather than just boys. Moving on though, Rockwell's influence on pop culture isn't just limited to references to his work, with some of his ideas surviving pretty much untouched to the modern day. For example, it was Rockwell, through a series of advertisements for Coca-Cola, who created the widely accepted image of Santa Claus still popular today. Yes, this man literally invented the popular image of frickin' Santa. But the sign of a true artist is the willingness to take risks, and rather than stay in his lane and remain content with creating images for ads and brands, he would frequently create politically charged pieces designed to shock and question the morals and ideals of the period in which he lived. For example, he took on the issue of segregation in public schools with a painting titled The Problem We All Live With, depicting 6-year-old Ruby Bridges being escorted to her school by 4 burly US Marshals. In the image behind the little girl is a wall covered with racist slurs, spattered tomatoes, and other images symbolic of the hate directed at the child. While Rockwell was by no means the only artist to create work intended to shine a light on the awful racist rhetoric of the era, he was one of the few with the reach to do so in art that would be seen by a mass audience. In this case, the readers of Look magazine, another popular American periodical of the era. Back to brands, Rockwell illustrated books creating ads for several products, including the already mentioned Coca-Cola, Jell-O, General Motors, and General Foods, to name a few. Yet he also painted portraits on commission, including those of presidents and leading foreign dignitaries. Celebrities also sat for his work, including Colonel Harlan Sanders, the founder of KFC, which, if you're keeping count, is 2 enduring symbols of America Rockwell captured in his art. 3 if you include the racism. Nonetheless, he is remembered chiefly for the cover art he created for the Saturday Evening Post, some of which were simple scenes while others told a story of their own. To many critics of his day and some critics now, his post covers were simplistic, idealistic, and rustic depictions of life in an America which no longer exists, if it ever existed at all. Rockwell's style is literally described as exaggerated realism, which is described by Put This On author Pete Anderson as real-looking people in situations with a hint of caricature. They evoke a time of kindly small-town doctors who made house calls, as well as took the time to treat a little girl's broken doll. Police officers treat small runaways to an ice cream and listen to their tale of woe. A soldier returns home, presumably from the war, greeted by family, friends, and neighbors, including the girl next door. Essentially an idealized vision of America's past that some still cling to or are nostalgic for to this day. The life of Norman Rockwell was long, spanned 2 world wars, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, Watergate, and many other crises and societal changes they brought about. His work reflected them all. Nearly all of his published works are held in public collections, save for all the stuff George Lucas has scooped up, we guess. Meaning they are still available for viewing by his target audience, the American population. He didn't work for the critics, and he probably wouldn't have minded being dismissed as simply an illustrator, since that was how he referred to himself. As a result, he illustrated much of the 20th century in paintings, sketches, and drawings. It may surprise those who view Rockwell's images of small-town America to learn that he was born and raised in the biggest of American cities, New York, being born there on February 3rd, 1894. Being born in a big city had its advantages though. For one, it meant that Rockwell was able to receive tutelage in art at the prestigious New York School of Art in his teens when his talent and aptitude for the subject became clear. In particular, Rockwell possessed a particular affinity for the more technical aspects of painting. Think composition, proportions, perspective, that sort of thing. Perhaps Rockwell's greatest skill, though, was his ability to simply transcribe whatever he was looking at near flawlessly onto the canvas before him. A talent that would basically form the foundation of his entire career as an artist and illustrator, with Rockwell making extensive use of things like reference photos, models, and in some cases projection. As in, he would literally project an image onto his canvas, then paint over it, adding in detail not present in the original to make it more wholesome or whatever. This isn't to say Rockwell was without talent or anything. Projection is a commonly used technique of both artists and illustrators to this day, and has been for literal centuries. And one of the things Rockwell became known for was the sheer amount of detail he was able to cram into an image no bigger than the cover of a magazine or book. For the curious, Rockwell frequently painted onto canvases many times the size of whatever his art would ultimately be used for, specifically to include as much detail as possible. So you know how comic books and their covers are illustrated on 11 by 17 Bristol board usually? Well, they're usually shrunk down by about 20%, 20 to 25% for publication. Rockwell was illustrating on much larger canvases, and then it was getting shrunk down even more. Anyway, this eye for detail and innate talent for quickly farting out high-quality replications of photos and reference models which sported additional detail or simply better composition and lighting saw Rockwell being hired as the art director for the aforementioned Boys Life magazine before he was even out of his teens. His first paid commission, meanwhile, occurred a few years earlier than this, before Rockwell had even turned 16. With a young artist being paid to paint the front of a bunch of Christmas cards. A fitting foray into art for the man who would eventually come to create the most enduring image of the season's jolliest representative. Anyway, at 19, Rockwell was promoted at Boys Life, becoming the publication's art editor. During this time, he also produced his first cover art, a painting titled Scout and Ship's Wheel, September 1913. Rockwell did not title his cover paintings himself. The names for the work usually came from editors or from common use. As for his personal life, Rockwell would marry for the first time in 1916, tying the knot with an Irish Catholic schoolteacher called Irene O'Connor. For a while, the marriage was good, with Rockwell even using O'Connor as the model for a painting simply titled Mother's Day Off. The first piece Rockwell would submit to the Saturday Evening Post, starting a relationship with the publication that would outlast all three of his eventual marriages, continuing on for 47 years, during which Rockwell contributed another 323 paintings to the magazine as cover art. His success at the Post led to him abandoning his position at Boys Life, though he continued to accept commissions for work for the Boy Scouts of America at that magazine, as well as calendars, posters, and advertisements. His popular Post covers led to commissions for similar work at numerous magazines, including Life magazine, which in those days relied on paintings and drawings for its illustrations, rather than the photojournalism that later became famous. Photo editing being something of a pain in the ass back then meant that it was just easier and cheaper to have an artist like Rockwell create an idealized version of whatever the photographer was trying to capture. In 1918, as the Americans entered World War I, Rockwell attempted to enlist in the United States Navy. His first attempt led him to being rejected for being underweight. At the time, he weighed less than the minimum 148 pounds required for his height of 6 feet. After forcing himself to gain weight, he was accepted, passed the physical, and served in the Navy for the duration of the war, illustrating training manuals, recruitment posters, advertisements, and other similar materials. So if Wonder Woman was a real person in real life, she would have more than likely been illustrated by Norman Rockwell. In the 1920s, he resumed his work on cover art for magazines, the annual calendars for the Boy Scouts, and various advertisements. Due to the popularity of the Saturday Evening Post and other magazines in the 1920s and 1930s, his name, always plainly printed as Norman Rockwell, became familiar to readers. He became one of the best-known illustrators and painters in the United States, and the popularity of his work led to steadily increasing commissions. But all was not well in his personal life. In 1930, Rockwell's marriage collapsed, and he and Irene divorced that year. Though he had no shortage of work, Rockwell found life in New Rochelle unbearable in the aftermath of the divorce. He relocated to California at the invitation of his friend Clyde Forsyth. While there, residing in Alhambra, he painted several of what became his most well-known paintings, including the aforementioned painting of a kindly doctor treating a little girl's doll. Titled appropriately The Doctor and the Doll, the painting served as the cover for the Saturday Evening Post for March 9, 1929. It depicts a little girl with concern evident on her face, offering her doll to the doctor, who gravely applies his stethoscope to the doll's chest. The doctor's eyes are directed toward the ceiling, as if he is really listening, though a slight smile appears on his face. The painting became one of Rockwell's most popular, and has since been reproduced on commemorative plates, figurines, stamps, and other media. It has also been the subject of medical literature and debate over ethics. In regard to that last part, some have argued that Rockwell's overly saccharine style is insulting to viewers, and ignores the fact that at no point in American history has access to healthcare, even for a small doll, been as simple, easy, or readily available as depicted in the image. Of particular note is an observation made in the American Medical Association Journal of Ethics, specifically the fact that even for the time the painting was created, 1929, details of the doctor's study from his books to furniture are outdated. Yet, the piece was not only accepted as an accurate, if idealized, version of how medical care actually worked, but like many of Rockwell's other pieces, suggests an idea of American history that literally did not exist. Shortly after completing The Doctor and the Doll, Rockwell met and married his second wife, a schoolteacher named Mary Barstow. After their marriage, he returned to New Rochelle with his new bride. In 1939, the Rockwells moved again, this time to the quintessential New England town of Arlington, Vermont. There, Rockwell lived in the small-town environment reflected in so many of his paintings. Small independent shops, quiet neighborhoods with leafy streets, nearby swimming holes and parks, friendly residents, and 4 distinct seasons, each with its own charms and challenges. Rockwell's contributions to the American war effort during the years that encompass the Second World War were many and varied. He continued to produce patriotic imagery for magazine illustrations and covers. Among the most famous was his portrayal of Rosie the Riveter. American women began flooding the workforce, filling the jobs formerly held by men off to war, as well as the new jobs created by the rapid expansion of American industry. A 1942 popular song christened these women with the name Rosie the Riveter. Rockwell gave the Rosie of the song a face. As with so many of his enduring paintings, Rosie the Riveter was created as a cover for the Saturday Evening Post, appearing in May 1943. Rockwell's image has Rosie on a break, presumably lunch since she is eating a sandwich. Her face and arms are smudged with work-related grime. A rivet gun lays across her lap. Her feet are on top of a copy of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, and an American flag fills the backdrop of the painting. The imagery is unmistakable. Hitler and his Nazis are no match for empowered American women, who will crush them with their toned, well-muscled arms.
Death! By snoo-snoo!
Yeah!
Amusingly, Rosie being so hefty resulted in Rockwell having to apologize to his model for the piece, a 19-year-old phone operator called Mary Louise Doyle. You see, Doyle was a very slight woman, which didn't really fit with Rockwell's vision for the piece, prompting him to add a bunch of muscles and tone to said muscles to his final painting. He also tweaked the proportions a bunch to make it look as though Rosie was not only snacking on a sandwich that was pure protein, but that she was also a giant, for which he would send Doyle a heartfelt apology letter a few years later. Something that dates the time the piece was created in quite well, since we feel Rockwell would have probably had a very different career path in the internet age with his penchant for drawing super realistic, ginormous women with rippling muscular arms. Moving swiftly on, it's worth noting here that at the time this image of Rosie was by far the most famous, but it was not the first, and oddly is not the one people today are likely familiar with. As we imagine, most everyone at home probably thinks of the We Can Do It poster depicting the original muscle mommy, flexing her stuff when we say Rosie the Riveter. This image was created by artist J. Howard Miller a full year before Rockwell's take on the character. However, since then, it has become the definitive image of the character, in part because Rockwell's estate would sue the ever-loving out of anyone trying to use his version, leading to Miller's poster being used instead. In 1943, Rockwell also produced a group of 4 paintings based on the 4 freedoms defined by President Franklin Roosevelt's State of the Union speech of January 1941, a full 11 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Saturday Evening Post ran a series over 4 consecutive weeks beginning in February 1943, with each edition featuring a Rockwell cover depicting one of the 4 freedoms, and a corresponding essay in the magazine examining the freedoms and what they meant to America. The first, Freedom of Speech, appeared on February 20th, 1943. It was followed by Freedom of Worship on February 27th, Freedom from Want on March 6th, and Freedom from Fear on March 13th. After their appearance on the magazine cover, the US government obtained the rights to the images and used them extensively in posters designed to support war bond drives and scrap collection drives. Perhaps the most well-known of these today is Freedom of Speech, which depicts a generic-looking blue-collar man standing up in dissent at what appears to be a town meeting. Today, it has become a popular meme template, often used to express common-sense-sounding platitudes that are, for one reason or another, considered controversial, like impossibly gigantic women who like sandwiches and hate Hitler are hot. Ironically, the inspiration for the painting, at least according to Rockwell, was a guy standing up at a town meeting to argue against rebuilding a school that had been burned down because he was annoyed it'd make his taxes go up. Besides Rosie and the 4 freedoms, Rockwell created numerous other images designed to boost morale and remember the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines serving so far from home. In some of these, he depicted servicemen on furlough or leave, a sailor lounging in a hammock, a soldier arriving at the train station, or, at the end of the war, a Marine, Japanese flag in hands, telling of his adventures to acquaintances at his neighborhood garage. All of these appeared as covers for the Saturday Evening Post. As part of his World War II work, Norman Rockwell created a character whom he named Willie Gillis Jr. Willie was created to allow the Saturday Evening Post to track his military career from induction into the Army to his discharge, though he, like the majority of men in uniform during the war, never saw battle. Along with Willie, Rockwell created a girl back home. Rockwell drew Willie as an all-American boy, freckled and not unlike Archie of the Archie comics fame. Willie appeared on 11 Post covers over the course of the war, the first in October 1941, 2 months before America entered the war, but subsequent to the United States reinstating the draft in 1940. In November, just 8 days before Pearl Harbor, he was seen in bed at home while on leave. Private Gillis changed throughout the course of the war, growing larger and apparently stronger. His several depictions included him attending church, serving the monotonous kitchen duty, and visiting the USO, among others. In one memorable cover, two girls back home are ready to come to blows with each other after discovering that Willie had sent them both pictures of himself in uniform. Though implying Willie was a bit of a rogue and possibly a legend, another painting has Willie's girl back home in bed at midnight on New Year's Eve, with pictures of Willie looking down from above her bed. A faithful girl back home was good for morale, both with the troops and the home front. The final Willie Gillis cover was for the October 5th, 1946 edition of the Post. It depicted Willie in college using the GI Bill benefits he earned throughout his military service. Willie is far different from his first appearance, presenting a mature, studious, yet relaxed attitude, having successfully gone through his trial by fire. Only one known painting featuring Willie Gillis, which did not appear on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post, exists. In it, Willie is riding in a convoy, wearing combat gear and carrying a rifle. For many years, the painting hung at Gardner High School, Gardner, Massachusetts, a gift from the painter. In 2014, it was sold at auction to an unidentified bidder for $1.9 million, the proceedings being used to create a foundation to award scholarships and support educational needs to the Gardner school system. Norman Rockwell enjoyed submitting humor in his paintings, sometimes in more overt ways than others. In one titled The Shiner, a young girl sits on a bench outside of the school principal's office. Her hair is disheveled, her blouse partially outside her skirt's waistband, her socks droop about her ankles, and her left eye is blackened. Yet her face bears an impish grin, which implies more than anything that whomever had been her recent opponent in fisticuffs got the worst of the matter. Though clearly in trouble, she is just as clearly triumphant. In another, a Post cover from 1948 entitled Chain of Gossip, a series of heads, each in pairs, are shown in what appears to be animated conversation. The person on the left is clearly enjoying conveying some salacious information, the other appears shocked. In the next pairing, the formerly shocked person is enjoying passing the information along to another equally shocked recipient. Some of the exchanges are via telephone. They continue through 15 conversations before, in the end, the person who started the chain is the recipient of the same gossip. In another, from the Post in 1919, a businessman is leaving his office after placing a note on his door claiming to be absent due to an important business meeting. He glances back at the viewer with a sly grin, the golf clubs hanging on his shoulder giving the lie to his excuse for his absence away. Back then, this was considered hilarious. Rockwell created several joke paintings as magazine covers, often to correspond with April Fool's Day. In 1943, the cover depicted a man and woman playing checkers. In the manner of the currently popular "What's Wrong with This Picture" puzzles, numerous oddities are displayed throughout the painting. For some inexplicable reason, the woman holds a pipe wrench in her right hand. Though she is sitting at a table in a carpeted room, she is wearing ice skates. Her male opponent wears roller skates. A bottle and glass are suspended in the air between them. A clock on the mantel has a dial which is reversed, and the subject of a painting alongside the clock leans outside of the frame watching the action. In short, there are too many oddities to list here. Rockwell painted plumbers playing with their clients' makeup and perfume, a truck stopped in an alley clogging traffic because a small dog won't yield the right of way, a small boy with his pants down awaiting a shot from his doctor while carefully reading the doctor's medical degree on the wall. He painted a babysitter trying to read a how-to book about babysitting, while a squalling infant sits in her lap, its little fist giving a good yank to the sitter's hair. They are surrounded by a mess of toys the little deer apparently took no interest in. Again, these may sound cliche, but they're cliche because of Rockwell. While known for his depictions of idealized and some would say fictionalized American history and life, Rockwell's skills as a portrait painter were undeniable, leading to him being repeatedly commissioned to do exactly that. For example, his final cover for the Saturday Evening Post in 1963 was a commissioned portrait of President John F. Kennedy, who had been assassinated the preceding month. He also painted portraits of Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, Johnson, and Nixon. Rockwell's Kennedy portrait is noteworthy as he was one of only a few painters to depict Kennedy in this time where the president was shown looking directly at the viewer, something artists tend to avoid doing when painting someone who recently died. For example, the guy who painted Kennedy's official White House portrait, Aaron Schickler, opted to paint the former president looking down, as if deep in thought, as they didn't, to quote, want to paint the eyes of a dead man. Rockwell, meanwhile, painted Kennedy as he was when alive, confident and looking forward, an interesting choice that made for a striking cover to the magazine. In addition to painting presidents, he did portraits for singer and actress Judy Garland, Egyptian leader Abdul Gamal Nasser, an album cover including portraits of musicians Al Kooper and Mike Bloomfield titled The Live Adventures of Mike Bloomfield and Al Kooper, and several movie posters as well. In the latter category, he produced a poster for the 1966 remake of Stagecoach, which included portraits of Anne Margaret, Mike Connors, Bing Crosby, Van Heflin, and several others. As part of his compensation for this work, he appeared in the film as an extra, playing, in his own words, a mangy old gambler. One of his most interesting and most famous portraits was of himself. Known as the Triple Self-Portrait, it was created in 1960 as a cover for the Saturday Evening Post. In the foreground is Rockwell viewed from behind. He is leaning to his left to peer into a mirror in the background. A bespectacled image of the artist reflects back to him. Between the two, visible because the artist is leaning, is an unfinished painting of the artist. In the front and back images, the artist's eyeglasses are visible, but the image in the middle being worked on by the artist is not wearing any. There are self-portraits of other artists pinned to his easel, including Rembrandt and Van Gogh, perhaps a nod to his self-perception as an artist rather than as a mere illustrator. The painting also made allusion to Rockwell's frequent use of models and references for his images. Rockwell created the painting to accompany an excerpt from his autobiography in the magazine. Interestingly, though he portrayed himself in company with other artists, he titled his autobiography My Adventures as an Illustrator. Norman Rockwell died in Stockbridge on November 8, 1978. The cause of death was emphysema. He was buried in Stockbridge Cemetery. The town honors him with the Norman Rockwell Museum. Originally housed at his former studio, the museum moved to a new location nearby in 1993. Numerous original and reproduction copies of his work can be seen at the museum, including The Four Freedoms, The Problem We All Live With, and The Runaway. The latter was produced in 1958, depicting a young runaway boy being counseled by a policeman at a soda fountain. It remains one of Rockwell's most popular works. His work has been the subject of countless exhibitions, including at the prestigious Guggenheim Museum. His works sell for steadily increasing amounts at auctions. For example, in 2013, his painting Saying Grace sold for $46 million. It was originally produced as cover art for the November 24, 1951 edition of the Saturday Evening Post. Copies of the actual magazines bearing Rockwell covers and/or illustrations are also collectibles. In addition to the Post and Look magazines, they include Boy's Life, Popular Science, Life, Literary Digest, and many others. During his career, especially early in his career, talented illustrators were in great demand before photography replaced painting as the main source of illustrations. Rockwell filled that demand for magazines, motion pictures, advertisements, announcements, music, newspapers, and many other customers. All are now collectibles. They made him famous in his lifetime, and though he was certainly well-to-do financially, it was only years after his death that they commanded the fabulous sums that they do today. Today, the term Norman Rockwell painting is used to describe an idyllic small town, a slice of Americana, a quaint rural scene, a family outing, and much more, as a term of praise. It can also be used disparagingly, implying a blandness or a corniness outside of the bustle of real life. His work is both nostalgic and largely fictional. His characters never were in serious trouble, their misdeeds falling into the categories of harmless mischief rather than serious crimes. Still, he depicted many of the foibles of American life over most of the 20th century, through good times and bad. In the end, he became part of the world he largely created in his art. I hope you learned something today, and if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment your favorite 20th century artists, subscribe to the channel if you're not, and share this video with someone who loves learning about the people and historical events that have shaped our history. I'm Eric Malachite, and I'll see you next time, Space Cowboy.